Friends, welcome back to the City of Angels. Let's take stock of what we have seen thus far. We started with something from Sant'Agata Bolognese. Then we moved on to something from the exotic place called Motown. That was something, looked like something old, but actually is something entirely new. Now we move on to something, the Buick Avenir, which is now called the LaCrosse. So you and I need to really unpack this because there's a lot of stuff going on here that you're not really seeing, but then again you are seeing because there's a lot of design and a lot of proportions hidden in plain sight. And if I must be completely honest with you, I have a soft spot in my heart for Buicks because I grew up on Buicks. And one day when I have a lot of garage space, I'm gonna get me a 65 Electra 225 convertible. Until that day, let's go over some of the bits that makes this special besides being a stunning looking car. So let's roll back to, what was it, February of this year when you and I talked about the Buick Avenir. And granted, it was January, Detroit Auto Show, that they premiered the car, but you and I were filming the Corvette Z06 in a very cold East Texas. And what I shared with you was the Avenir is the way a Buick should look. And obviously Ed Welburn and everybody else at General Motors were definitely paying attention because now we have a production car, a production Buick. I mean, let that roll around in your brain for a little bit. A production Buick looks like this. And it's really not just taking a design of a concept car and putting it on a production platform. There's a lot more that went into this. And basically, you guys remember Brian Nesbitt? Way back in the day, we talked with him at the New York Auto Show, I think in like 2012, about the 2013 Malibu. Well, since then, he went to China, he ran design in China, and now he's back and he runs Buick design. Well, he came back to the US and he went and negotiated the platform of this car before they started the design of this car. So you can see some of that. It's not just lines, like it's a Buick, right? So you're gonna think there's gonna be a sweep spear that goes all the way through it. What they did here is they took a line from above the headlight, ran all the way under the greenhouse to give it some like dimension, some shape to it. That's why it looks a little bit more sexy from the side and especially 3/4. But then they broke the line here and then picked a line up here that goes all the way over the rear haunch. And the whole idea is to break up like the heft, the mass of this area here. But that's nice to give it some width. But why does this look sexier than the LaCrosse that frankly came before it? Well, this, if you're being completely honest, it's based on the Chevrolet Malibu platform, but there's a couple of changes that Brian negotiated in advance. Number one, it's a longer wheelbase. I think it's like 2 or 3 inches they added here. But then here's the biggest thing. Look at the dash to axle ratio here. We talked about this in New York with a Cadillac CT6. And the reason why a rear-wheel drive car looks better to you, I don't care what it is. It could be a Hyundai Genesis, it could be a BMW 7 Series. It looks better because the wheels in the front, they go out to the bumper a little farther. So the farther you get the wheels out, the car looks more planted, it looks lower, it looks wider. That's the way the whole thing works. Well here, this is a front drive platform. It's based off a front drive platform, even though it's a little bit longer. So what they negotiated was to put a little extra length in the front so you get more dash to axle ratio here. And that is really the single biggest thing about the proportion that changes this car. There's still one more thing about design. Notice the height of it. If you were to go to a current LaCrosse, it sits about 1 inch or 2 higher than this. What they did was push the whole car down. So now, let's bring it all together. It's a lower car. It has more, I like to call it theater. These lines add theater instead of just a slab-sided design that's kind of boring. And then you add this very important dash to axle ratio here. Now, there's a couple of other changes, but really we need to check them out on the inside of the car to just kind of bring it all together. Lots of change on the outside, but what about the inside? Now, whenever I talk to you about the interior of design, I know I bring this up a lot, the Porsche 928. Now, if you remember the design of that dashboard, basically, they took the dashboard, they pushed it down and farther out to the firewall, and the idea was more of a visual trick to make the interior of a sports car feel more open and airy. Well, here is a large D-segment car, and they've done kind of the same trick by pushing the dashboard farther away from you and then tilting it down. But there's a couple of other things going on here. Now, the Buick LaCrosse, they did a nice job on the previous one. The interior was nice, but that one was designed in Asia, and you could tell the influence was very much an Asian design. Where this, to me, it feels much more international. Like, look at the design, the way they put the colors together, and this one actually has a dark color, and you still feel open and airy in here. You got the wood here, the leather trim here, but then also it's not just the color, it's the tactile feel. Like all these buttons here, and this is a pre-production car, these buttons are like a couple of steps above the current Buick LaCrosse, and even the way this like airbag here, the design of it, they've made it smaller to kind of fit in with this whole more open and airy feel, so you don't feel like you got this huge heft sitting in front of your face. There's a couple of technical bits here. They got an 8-inch screen here, which is basically a digital display. You can reconfigure whatever you want. You've got Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, and then over here they've got a wireless charger. So basically you take your phone out and you could put it in here and you get wireless charging, provided you've got the Qi system on your phone here. Now that's pretty much everything on the interior. One thing mechanically about this, we looked at the Cadillac XT5, that had virtually the same shifter. So you've got the Prindle here on like a display, it lights up. But the real thing here is it's actually not mechanically linked to the transmission. It's like a transmission fly-by-wire kind of thing. So that opens up storage space down here. So that's everything on the inside, and that's the design. I still think we're forgetting one thing. And normally you and I start with the engine and then we work our way to things like design. Here we did things in reverse for obvious reasons, but we need to work back to the engine. Now remember that Cadillac XT5 we just talked about? I forgot to share with you some important numbers. That's a 3.6 V6, puts out 310 horsepower and 274 pound-feet of torque, which comes in at 2,000 RPM but stays flat all the way to 5,000 RPM. So this engine is actually the same engine. So remember, it starts in the CT6, goes to the XT5, but this is the first application in General Motors where they're doing it in a front-wheel drive passenger car that's not a Cadillac. I know that's a lot of qualifiers there. But they're still going to bring over the cylinder deactivation, so 6 down to 4, and then the auto stop start. Now there's something different here with the Buick application. So all the transmissions, so basically you get just a V6, that's anything you want as long as it's a V6, and then you get an 8-speed automatic with a torque converter. But there is going to be an all-wheel drive system here, which is not new. The last LaCrosse had an all-wheel drive system, but what's new here, it's a dual-clutch all-wheel drive system. So I'm actually kind of excited to drive that, and I don't think we're driving this car until like the summer, so stay tuned for that. So we've covered some of the technical bits. We've covered some of the, well, a lot of the design, and then there's the suspension. So there is another, I don't want to say carryover, but some of the stuff that is shared with the Cadillac XT5. The rear suspension, it also has a 5-link rear suspension instead of that like H deal they had in the previous car. So really a lot of high-tech changes here that, again, you and I are going to have to drive. But overall, let's put aside the technical bits. I need to leave you guys with a question here, because I know I am completely biased about Buicks, growing up on Buicks, and to some extent Volvos, so I need to recuse myself from passing judgment on this design, because I personally am excited by the way this thing looks, because they took the proportions of a show car, put it on a front-wheel drive platform, and actually pulled it off. That's what I think. But again, I need to recuse myself from this. So my question to you is this. This car competes against some pretty heavy hitters. Like, it competes against the Lexus. You can get 2 or 3 different Mercedes. You can afford an Audi for the price this thing's going to be. And, you know, I'm not a big Acura, actually not an Acura guy in any way, shape, or form, but you could get an Acura for the same price. Would you give up any of those to buy a Buick? Let me know why you would, not a Buick, this Buick. Let me know why you would or why you wouldn't, and actually how you would equip the car. And also, what region of the world you live in. Let me know in the comments below or via our social media, MotoManTV all one word, MotoManTV all one word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, I'm gonna leave you with 2 things. We're gonna come back to you with a couple more cars from the LA Auto Show here, but make sure you are following us on Twitter Instagram, and Facebook, and also Periscope, because we're doing some Periscope here as well, so we can get you some pics. Actually, I've been hanging out with Dave Leone, and we got a picture of him. Actually, we just ran into Dave Coleman over at Mazda, so some of the guys that have been on the show before. And with that, we're going to press on, I think now to the CX-9 or a Mini or something like that. Anyway, bis später.